So gentlemen, Ellen began, flashing a sly smile at the crowd, we have two icons of action cinema today. Sylvester Stallone and Frank Grillo. Let's start with something juicy. What do you think about modern action films relying more on special effects than real physical grit? You know, Ellen, back in my day, we did it all for real. Blood, sweat, broken bones, that was all on set. Today, it's all green screens and computers. I'm not saying it's bad, but he paused, glancing at Frank. Authenticity is hard to fake. Frank nodded, but his eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I agree, Sly, but let's be real. Modern actors, like me, train just as hard. I'm in the gym every day, hitting the heavy bag, working with stunt coordinators. Effects are a tool, not a replacement. The problem is, some folks from the older generation, he shot a look at the audience, sometimes underestimate how much work we put in. The crowd stirred. Some clapped for Frank's boldness, while others whispered indignantly, defending Stallone. Ellen, sensing the tension, quickly pivoted. Okay, let's talk about your collaboration. You both worked on The Expendables. Any behind-the-scenes stories you'd care to share? Maybe some friendly rivalries. She winked at the audience. Sylvester chuckled, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. Oh, we were like a big family out there. Frank, though, was always trying to prove he was the toughest guy on set. Remember when you challenged Arnold to arm wrestling? Frank smiled, but it was tight. Yeah, and I would have won if you hadn't distracted him with your jokes. But seriously, Sly, you were always the leader on set. Sometimes maybe a bit too. How do I put it? Authoritarian. The room froze. The word authoritarian hung in the air like thunder before storm. Sylvester turned his head toward Frank, his brows knitting together. Authoritarian, he repeated, his voice sharper. Kid, I carried that project on my shoulders. Without my script and my connections, The Expendables would have never gotten off the ground. Frank didn't back down. He straightened, his voice calm but firm. I'm not downplaying your contributions, Sly. But sometimes you acted like we were just background players in your show. I respect your experience, but respect goes both ways. Ellen tried to defuse the situation. Whoa, gentlemen, let's cool it down. Just a friendly chat, right? She laughed nervously, but the audience was already buzzing. Some shouted, Sly, you're the best, while others cheered, tell him, Grillo. Sylvester stood from his chair, his face flushed. You know what, Frank? If you had a problem with how I ran things, you could have said it to my face, not here in front of the whole country. Frank stood too, his eyes blazing, but his voice steady. I'm saying it now, Sly, and I don't want to fight. I want us to talk like adults. You're a legend, but that doesn't mean you're always right. The studio erupted in applause and shouts. Ellen, realizing the situation was spiraling, called for a commercial break. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go anywhere. The cameras cut, but the tension lingered. Sylvester stormed off to the wings, muttering under his breath. Frank stayed on stage, staring out at the audience as they whispered and exchanged glances. His pulse pounded in his temples, but deep down he knew he didn't want war. He wanted to be heard. Backstage, the green room smelled of lotion and stale coffee. Sylvester sat in a chair, clutching a water bottle, while his manager tried to calm him down. Sly, let it go. He's just young, chasing clout. It's not about clout, Sylvester snapped. It's about respect. I earned my place with blood and sweat. And he thinks he can just call me out like that. Meanwhile, Frank stood by a window, gazing at the twinkling lights of nighttime Los Angeles. The streets pulsed with the hum of traffic, and the air carried the faint scent of exhaust. He knew his words might cost him his friendship with Stallone, or even his career. But staying silent wasn't an option anymore. Ellen approached, her face serious. Frank, you sure you want to keep this going? This could get, well, loud. I don't want a war, Ellen, Frank said quietly. But I'm tired of people like Sly thinking their status means they don't have to listen. I want to talk to him. For real. Ellen nodded, her eyes showing a flicker of respect. Then do it. But be careful. He's not one to back down easily. When the show resumed, the audience was on edge, waiting to see if the clash would escalate or fizzle out. Frank and Sylvester returned to their seats, but an invisible wall stood between them. Ellen, keeping things under control, posed a new question. Gentlemen, let's talk about what unites you. You're both symbols of strength, but what does it mean to be strong in real life, off-screen? Frank spoke first, his voice calm but earnest. For me, strength isn't just muscles or a loud voice. It's about listening to someone, even if you disagree. It's admitting you might be wrong. I grew up in the Bronx, where every day was a fight. And I learned that real strength is in dialogue, not fists. The crowd roared with applause. Sylvester sat silent, his fingers gripping the armrests. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer than before. I agree, dialogue matters. But Frank, you've got to understand, when you've fought for your place your whole life, you're not always ready to hear criticism. I'm not perfect, but I've always tried to do what's right for the project, for the people. Frank nodded, his gaze softening for the first time that evening. I respect that, Sly, but I need you to know, we're not enemies. I just want my voice to matter too. Ellen sensed the tension easing and jumped in. You know, gentlemen, this is what makes you both special. You're not afraid to be real. And I think our audience loves that. The crowd erupted again, the atmosphere warming. It seemed like Frank and Sylvester were inching toward reconciliation. They exchanged cautious smiles, and Ellen prepared to wrap the show on a positive note. But then chaos struck. As the closing credits rolled, a breaking news headline flashed on the screen behind Ellen. Kevin Hart weighs in on unfiltered scandal. Frank Grillo's jealous of Stallone, and it's obvious. The audience gasped. Sylvester whipped his head toward the screen, his face darkening. Frank froze, his eyes narrowing as he read Hart's words. Ellen, noticing the shift, tried to salvage the moment. Oh, looks like a technical glitch. Let's ignore those headlines, she said, her voice trembling. But it was too late. Sylvester turned to Frank, his tone icy. So this is your game, Frank? Set me up, and then leak stories through your buddies. Frank raised his hands, his voice steady but strained. Sly, I had nothing to do with this. I don't even know where it came from. Kevin's a friend, but I didn't ask him to say anything. A friend, huh? Sylvester scoffed. Convenient excuse. The crowd buzzed again, some shouting, Sly, don't fall for it, while others called out, Grillo, explain yourself. Ellen, realizing the show was ending in chaos, rushed to close. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow with new guests. Her words drowned in the noise. The cameras cut, but the tension in the studio lingered. Sylvester stood and walked off to his green room without another word. Frank stayed on stage, staring at the screen where the headlines still lingered. Anger and frustration churned in his chest. Who planted this story? And why now, just when they were so close to understanding each other? Backstage, Frank pulled out his phone and dialed Kevin Hart. After a few rings, Kevin answered, his voice as energetic as ever. Frank, man, what went down? I saw clips of the show, epic. Kevin, what's with the tabloid comment? Frank asked sharply. Did you really say I'm jealous of Sly? A pause. Then Kevin laughed, but it was nervous. Dude, I didn't say that. I was joking with a reporter about how you and Sly were going at it on the show, but they twisted it. You know how tabloids work. Frank sighed, running a hand over his face. Kevin, your joke just poured gas on the fire. Sly thinks I set this up. Oh, damn, Kevin said, sounding genuinely upset. Let me post something, clear it up. No, Frank cut him off. That'll just make it worse. I'll handle it. He hung up and stared at the door to Sylvester's green room. The air in the hallway was heavy, smelling of lotion and tension. Frank knew he couldn't just walk away. But how could he convince Stallone he wasn't behind the leak? And who was orchestrating this mess, a random reporter or someone with a vendetta? Frank knocked on Sylvester's door. No answer. He knocked again, louder. "Sly, it's Frank. We need to talk." There was a rustle, then Sylvester's low voice. "I said what I had to, Frank. Go home." Frank clenched his fists, but kept his breathing steady. "I'm not leaving until we sort this out. You can think what you want about me, but I'm not lying. I didn't ask Kevin to say anything." Silence. Frank thought Sylvester wouldn't respond, but the door suddenly opened. Stallone stood in the doorway, his eyes tired but still burning with anger. "You want me to believe you," he said. "Then prove it. Because right now, it looks like you're playing a dirty game." Frank nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Fine, Sly. I'll prove it. But you've got to give me a chance." They stood face to face, the air between them crackling with tension. Outside, Los Angeles hummed with life, cars honked, lights flickered, and somewhere in the digital ether, the story of their clash was going viral. Could they find common ground? Or would this leak be the final straw that shattered any hope of reconciliation? The next morning, Los Angeles woke to the roar of the scandal. Cafes on Sunset Strip buzzed with chatter, waiters whispering as they poured coffee, while gym TVs replayed clips from Unfiltered. Frank sat in his apartment, holding a cup of espresso, its aroma mingling with the scent of fresh paint. He'd recently moved in. His phone vibrated with messages from agents, friends, and even a few reporters begging for comments. He ignored them, scrolling through social media for clues about the leak. Meanwhile, Sylvester sat in his Beverly Hills office, surrounded by posters of Rocky and Rambo. His daughter, Sophia, brought him a cup of tea, her face etched with concern. "Dad, don't you think you were a bit harsh?" she asked softly. "Frank doesn't seem like the type to play dirty." Sylvester sighed, his fingers tightening around the cup. "I don't know, sophomore. In this business, everyone wears a mask. But if he's telling the truth, then someone else is making fools of us both." Frank, after hours at his laptop, found a lead. The account that posted the studio leak belonged to an insider known for getting scoops from studio staff. Frank texted his agent, asking them to check if any Expendables producers had a motive to stir trouble. The reply came fast. Eric Lind, a junior producer, had been ousted from the project after clashing with Stallone. Eric had access to insider info and ties to tabloids. Frank's pulse quickened. He dialed Sylvester. After a few rings, Stallone answered, his voice cautious. "What do you want, Frank?" "Sly, I think I know who's behind this. Eric Lind. Remember him? You two fought over the script, and he got kicked off. I think he's out for revenge." A pause. Then Sylvester spoke, his tone quiet but intrigued. "Eric? That slimy guy? If that's true, Frank, we've got a problem. He knows too much." "Then let's handle it together," Frank said. "We can go to the studio, talk to the execs. If Eric's behind this, we'll stop him." Sylvester was silent for a moment, then said, "All right, but if you're setting me up, Frank, I won't forgive you." "I'm not," Frank replied, his voice firm. "Meet me at the studio tomorrow. 10 o'clock. Part 5, The Resolution. The studio office in Hollywood was abuzz with tension. Glass walls reflected the morning sun, and the air smelled of fresh coffee and disinfectant. Frank and Sylvester sat on one side of a conference table, facing Linda Crow, the executive producer of The Expendables. A sharp-eyed woman in a flawless suit, Linda exuded authority. Beside her sat Rick, Sylvester's manager, nervously flipping through papers. Linda spoke first, her voice calm but commanding. "Gentlemen, this situation is out of control. The social media firestorm is hurting our project. We're getting thousands of emails, some demanding Frank's removal, others threatening to boycott if Sly stays on as director. We need a solution." Frank leaned forward, his tone steady. "Linda, I think we know who started this. Eric Lind. He had access to project details and a grudge against us. I checked. The account that posted about my replacement is linked to a journalist Eric regularly feeds gossip to." Sylvester nodded, his gaze focused. "Eric was always trouble. He wanted to rewrite the script his way, but I shut him down. If he's behind this, we need to nail him. Linda raised an eyebrow, her fingers tapping the table. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? Frank pulled out his phone, showing screenshots of the insider account's messages and his agent's confirmation of Eric's tabloid connections. Linda studied them, her face unreadable. All right, she said finally. We'll launch an internal investigation. If Eric's involved, we'll take action. But that doesn't solve the public problem. The fans are divided, and we need to unify them. Sylvester sighed, his voice rough. I don't want this to end in a war. I'm willing to meet halfway. Maybe we go out together, say there's no bad blood. Frank nodded, his eyes meeting Slice. I'm in. But we've got to be real. People will smell it if we're just playing for the cameras. Linda smiled, the first time during the meeting. Then I suggest a press conference. You both speak, tell the truth about what happened, and show you're a team. It could work. The next day, the press conference took place in a downtown Los Angeles hotel. The room was packed with reporters, cameras humming, the air thick with the scent of hairspray and anticipation. Frank and Sylvester stood side by side at a podium, both in simple shirts, no suits or pretense. The audience, mostly over 55, waited eagerly. These were the folks who'd grown up on Stallone's films and admired Grillo for his honesty. Sylvester spoke first, his voice low and genuine. I want to say a few words. Frank and I got into it on the show, and that was real. But you know what? Fights happen. We're both passionate about our work, and sometimes that leads to tension. But we're not enemies, and we're not letting gossip or manipulation tear down what we're building. Frank took the mic, his gaze steady but warm. I respect Sly. He's a legend, and I've learned a ton from him. But I believe respect is a two-way street. We've talked, and we're working to make The Expendables better, together. As for the leaks, we know who's behind them, and we're handling it. But most importantly, we want you, our fans, to know we're on the same side. The room exploded in applause. Reporters scribbled quotes, and social media lit up with posts tagged #SlyandFrankUnited. A few fans in the crowd stood, shouting words of support. The atmosphere was electric, and for the first time in days, Frank felt the storm subsiding. After the conference, Frank and Sylvester lingered in the hotel lobby. The air smelled of fresh flowers, and a piano's soft notes drifted from the nearby restaurant. Sylvester extended his hand. You did good out there, Frank. Maybe I was a bit too hard on set. Frank shook his hand, his smile genuine. And you're not bad with a crowd, Sly. Maybe I'll learn a thing or two from you yet. They laughed, and in that moment, the tension melted away. But the story didn't end there. A week later, the studio confirmed Eric Lynn's involvement in the leaks, and he was officially barred from all future projects. Social media gradually calmed, and the Expendables gained a fresh wave of buzz from the scandal. Frank and Sylvester returned to work on the film, this time as partners, not rivals. They didn't become best friends, but they learned to listen to each other. And though Hollywood kept buzzing with gossip, they knew a small step toward understanding could change everything. The fans who'd watched this drama unfold felt they'd witnessed something real, not just a show, but a story of respect, conflict, and hope.